Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, y'all are having a wonderful day today. So, when it comes down to it, I thought, of course, that I would talk about this video that I found to be very particularly interesting. And, of course, with that is going to come the UFC 300 analyzations, which, of course, so far was the biggest fight of the year, or at least the biggest card of the year. And I don't think that it's really going to be surpassed because, of course, UFC 300, it's supposed to be basically the biggest card of the decade, when it comes down to it. And in my view, it was. We had a lot of great fights, even from the early prelims, like that of Davison Figueiredo versus Cody Garbrandt, all the way to the prelims with Aljamain Sterling and Calvin Kattar. Of course, all the way to the main event fights with Oliveira versus Sarukian, and, of course, Gaethje versus Max Holloway, and, of course, Alex Pereira versus that of Jamal Hill. A lot of either former champions or current champions at the current moment in time that, of course, were able to put the wins on the line, or their losses on the line, or their record on the line, I should say. Excuse me. But anyways, the two main fights that I'm probably going to be talking about here is going to be the two that probably left the most impact. That being, of course, the Alex Pereira versus that of the Jamal Hill fight, the title fight, and, of course, Max Holloway versus Justin Gaethje, which, of course, is creating a lot of waves right now. So I'm mainly going to be talking about those two fights, but every once in a while I'll probably talk about some of those other fights as well. But, excuse me, the question is especially about Mr. Alex Pereira, after he ended up knocking out Jamal Hill within that of the first round, and he's pretty much making a lot of these fights look easy. What pretty much is the next step for him? Does he stay at the light heavyweight class? Does he move up to the heavyweight class? Does he maybe stay at light heavyweight so he can have a third match in the UFC with that of Israel Adesanya to prove that he is the more superior fighter if he's able to beat that of Israel Adesanya? What does he necessarily do? And it appears that Alex Pereira, that he might have a plan to move up to that of the heavyweight class. And some people may think that it's a bad idea, but to be quite honest with you, I think that there's really almost nothing left for that of Alex Pereira. I mean, what really, if you're Alex Pereira, what really left is there to prove? And sure, the man is only about 10-2. He hasn't really had that many fights. But, once again, as I always state, it's not always about the amount of fights that you have. It's about who you have fought. And when you talk about Alex Pereira, the man is 10-2, I believe, now in his MMA career. And the man has beaten 5 champions throughout the UFC. He's beaten Sean Strickland. He's beaten Israel Adesanya. He's beaten Jan Blachowicz. Sure, a little bit older, but it was a very tough fight. He beat Jiri Prochazka, and of course he also beat that of Jamal Hill. So this dude clearly, and he was able to stop 4 out of 5 of those guys. So this dude clearly, he's a very bad man. There's no doubt about it. But the question is that can he potentially win the title also at the heavyweight class, which of course is going to be a very daunting task, whether he faces Tom Aspinall or John Jones. And both of those guys, in my view, are the 2 best heavyweights in the world right now. So we'll see. But anyways, let's get into the video. Let's see what they have to say. Let's get into it.
Let's get some instant analysis. Welcome CBS Sports combat analyst Brian Campbell here to recap UFC 300. Are you not entertained? Alex Pereira making quick work of Jamal Hill via first-round knockout, retains his light heavyweight title. He waves off Herb Dean, and then he looks into one of the cameras when the fight is over as if he was saying, "What do you want from me?" BC, how is Pereira making this look so easy?
Not even in the UFC.
Well, Pereira is really just a force of nature. Pereira is a dude to where, unless you're pretty much a heavyweight fighter, you're always going to have problems with him when he's at his best, because Pereira is a dude that's 6'4" with about a 79-inch arm reach. And then on top of that, he can counter pretty decently well. That's not me saying that he's flawless. At times, he can be a little bit too hittable. He does keep his hands down way too low sometimes for my liking. That's why he got knocked out against that of Israel Adesanya in the rematch. And that was a fight that Alex really should have won, because he had Israel in deep shit in that fight. But because he gave Israel Adesanya the perfect opportunity, he got caught. And, of course, that ended up happening. But this dude is just always going to be tough to face because he's somewhat relatively technically sound. Of course, his defense, in my view, could be a little bit better than what it is. And, of course, he could keep his hands up a little bit more and move his head a little bit more. But on top of that, he's getting better within each and every fight. And Alex Pereira, he's a guy that has monstrous power in both hands. Monstrous power. Like Alex Pereira, the way that he is right now in the UFC, this is what Deontay Wilder should have been if he was trained a little bit more at a younger age, what he really should have been for boxing.
UFC 3 full years after transition.
Or trained in a more technical fashion, I should say.
from a successful 2-division championship kickboxing career. We are watching one of the greatest takeovers in modern sports history from just making that quick adjustment and making it look like he was born to do this. 8 fights into his UFC career.
Well, obviously the man was born to do this. You don't accomplish what you've accomplished, and you're not born to do this. Alex Pereira obviously was just born to fight. He was born to kick ass and take names. That pretty much is about it. And like I said, he has 5 champions up on his wall. So once again, Alex Pereira, that dude, he's a very dangerous man. You know, and once again, I also wanted to bring up the 10-2 record because a lot of people, especially when it comes to boxing, when it came to the Vasily Lomachenko phenomenon, you know, many of the LDBC and new media channels, you know, they were trying to say, oh, Lomachenko is only like 12-1. How can you say that he's up there with a lot of pound-for-pound fighters? That's an insult to boxing. Because Lomachenko was facing champion after champion after champion after champion. You know, like when we take a look at Gervonta Tank Davis's record, for example, like he's 29-0, but it pretty much is, I don't want to say a fake 29-0, excuse me, because some of the fighters that he's fought have been, you know, probably around the B grade level. But, you know, it's certainly a lot more fraudulent than what that 12-1 record was from Lomachenko when he's fighting guys like Guillermo Rigondeaux, Nicholas Walters, and Jorge Linares, and Gary Russell Jr. So it's not really about how long of the record is that you have. It's about who you fought. It just is what it is, you know. And at the end of the day, Gervonta Tank Davis, for example, he doesn't have the record overall of some of these other fighters, even if they have less fights. Like, he has more fights on his record than that of a Devin Haney. He does not have the resume of a Devin Haney. It is what it is. And when we take a look at this, it's very similar. Are we not going to count Alex Pereira within the top 5 pound for pound of the sport because he's only 10-2? That just doesn't make any sense. You have to, because the man has defeated champion after champion after champion. I mean, literally every single one of his fights at the light heavyweight class, they've all been against former champions. Jan Blachowicz, Jiří Procházka, who never really officially lost his belt in the ring, but lost it because of an injury. Jamal Hill, the same thing. And he was able to stop both of those guys. So Alex Pereira, once again, this dude deserves the max amount of credit.
Alex Pereira is a 2-division champion who's defended the title in both divisions, headlined multiple big-time cards, including at Madison Square Garden, and has now knocked out Jamal Hill, the former champion who never lost his belt inside the cage, with the first significant punch landed in the deepest and arguably most spectacular card in UFC history. And what did he do in his call out afterwards? Said, oh, by the way, I wasn't hurt. We got a card coming up next month in Brazil. How about you put me on there at heavyweight? Yes, if we ever had an idea of who...
Well, I doubt that Dana White's going to do that quickly, Mr. Alex Pereira. But, you know, it's a nice thought. I definitely believe that Dana White will have Alex Pereira within that of the heavyweight class. I think that it would make a lot of bucks. It would make a lot of money. I definitely think that he will be willing to do that, and possibly in Brazil. But I'm going to be very curious to see who he could potentially fight. You know, it'd be a great fight. It would be Alex Pereira versus Derek Lewis. I would love to see that fight. And I don't find Derek Lewis to be someone that, in my view, is the most, you know, is the greatest fighter. But, you know, he is always someone that brings entertainment.
Might become the first fighter to at least have a chance at becoming a 3-division UFC champion. You're looking at him right there in Alex Pereira, and you can't just say it's the power, right? It's the smarts, it's the precision, it's the experience, the high-level combat experience. Look, this fight was criticized.
Absolutely, Alex Pereira, and once again, it isn't like he's completely flawless, but at the end of the day, you have to give that man his credit. You don't beat that many former champions and overall not have a very decent skill set. The man clearly is very decently skilled. Now, once again, he is a little bit flawed because his defense could be a little bit better. Sometimes he's a little bit too hittable. His hands aren't up a lot of the times. He relies a lot on that length and reach, you can tell. You know, so there is still some holes in his game. I wouldn't necessarily put him on the same level of skill level as someone like a George St. Pierre or a John Jones or an Anderson Silva or a Khabib Nurmagomedov, but he's still someone that can hold his own very quite well. And once again, if you can dominate these champions or knock them out the way that you're doing, you know, in that fashion, you very clearly still have a great skill set, no doubt about it.
For being the main event of UFC 300 with so many big names available, including Conor.
And the question is right now is Alex Pereira possibly the #1 pound-for-pound fighter in the world? Now, for me, I'm not really quite sure. You know, I think that you could debate John Jones there, of course, just because of his long names and his resume. I would probably debate John Jones. But if you were going to say Alex Pereira, you definitely could. There's, of course, also some other people that would debate Islam Makhachev. So of course you could debate any one of those fighters in my view as the number one pound for pound, and I might be missing another one. I'm not sure, but in my view, those would be the three fighters in the number one pound for pound conversation.
McGregor, including Max Holloway and Justin Gaethje, who put on an action classic on this night. But I'll tell you what.
Well, Max Holloway put on a classic performance. He put on a great knockout. I can't really say that it was a classic fight because Justin Gaethje, in my view, he really didn't come up to fight in that fight. And I ended up predicting Justin Gaethje overall to win against Max Holloway, but I did know that it was going to be, somewhat competitive in spots. I gave Max Holloway, I believe, about a 30 to 40% chance to win that fight because Max Holloway is a guy to where he's still technical. He's still a decently smart fighter. It's just that his skill set a lot of the times by his fan base and that of the UFC, it's been a little bit overrated, And Max Holloway's an all-time great fighter. Don't get it twisted. But his skill set in terms of being the best boxer in the UFC or the greatest featherweight of all time, no, he's not either of those. But he is a great fighter because there's a reason why when he faces a guy that can handle his size and on top of that has also great ability, he usually gets pieced up. It just is what it is. He did against Dustin Poirier, which a lot of the Max Holloway fans will try to tell you that it was a fight that could have went either way. Absolutely not. It was a very clear at least 4 rounds to 1 for Dustin Poirier. It just is what it is. And then, of course, he ended up getting dominated at least 2 out of 3 times against that of Alexander Volkanovski. It is what it is. And Max is still an all-time great fighter, no doubt about it. But Max Holloway is not on the level that his fan base overall tries to state that he is. No, he's not the best boxer in the UFC, and no, he's not the greatest featherweight of all time. No, he's not a top 10 nor top 20 pound-for-pound fighter of all time. No, he's not. But he is an all-time great fighter.
I don't know if the UFC got the matchup right, but they got the right fighter because what Pereira is doing is historic on an entirely another level. He's dominant, he's dangerous, and I don't know where his ceiling is. That's something right there.
How about the fact
that heavyweight division, though, is going to be that's going to be a very daunting task, like I said. Because John Jones and Tom Aspinall, not only would those be the biggest guys that he's ever fought, and I'm not quite sure if he would be able to rely on the same tricks as what he always has been able to do. Because those guys can hit. John Jones has never been known as a guy that has, complete A-grade level power in his hands. Now he, of course, can't stop you. He can knock you out combined with the grappling and the jiu-jitsu and the wrestling and, of course, also his kicks. John Jones is just, debatably the greatest all-around fighter of all time for MMA, but or especially the UFC. But, that'd be very interesting. And Tom Aspinall, let me tell you what, Tom Aspinall is a real threat to anyone in that weight class, including John Jones. That dude is a real threat.
low blow from Jamal Hill, and then Herb Dean's about to step in and goes, no, get out of my face. I'm going to take care of business right now. Like, I can't remember seeing something like that.
Well, he's always been so stoic and humble, which is such a key part of Alex Pereira's character and his development.
And let me also say this, because history oftentimes ends up getting rewritten, especially based off of certain events. John Jones, by the way, because a certain amount of people overall, they'll now tell you that Francis Ngannou was now avoiding John Jones and all that stuff. Nothing could be further from the truth. Francis Ngannou, overall, he actually wanted that fight. He called out John Jones multiple times, and John Jones basically stood out for 2 years in order to not fight that of Francis Ngannou. Okay? Those are just the facts of the matter. Because when Francis Ngannou was available and the champion of the weight class, John Jones was not fighting at all. He was not fighting at all. All right? Those are the facts of the situation. And John Jones said, in order to fight that of Francis Ngannou, overall, in order to fight that of Francis Ngannou, that he would need a major payday, which, of course, I don't really mind. That's something, that you should do when you're one of the greater fighters and you have a high degree of value. That's fine. But it's very clear that John Jones knew the threat that was overall that of, Francis Ngannou. So this stuff about, Francis, he went out of the UFC to avoid John Jones, all that is a bunch of bullshit. That fight was available for 2 years. John Jones didn't really show a great amount of interest in it. It is what it is. And then as soon as Cyril Gane was there, then all of a sudden he was there. Now once again, that's not me to strip credit away from John Jones whatsoever. But he knew the threat that Francis Ngannou was.
But let's not forget, he does have one very high-profile defeat inside the octagon that came in his MMA rematch with Israel Adesanya when he lost that middleweight title that he originally won by knocking Adesanya, his longtime kickboxing rival, out.
Absolutely, and he should have won that fight because Israel Adesanya was in deep shit. Israel Adesanya was going to get stopped again in that fight. His legs were toast. But Alex Pereira, once again, he keeps his hands down way too low sometimes, and it costs him. It costs him to get hit a little bit too much. And he got hit by a dude that also could be really hit, that could also really hit, and then he got knocked out. So Alex Pereira is going to have to tighten some of that stuff up. But I'm just not sure if he's going to. We'll see.
The 5th round of their first meeting. And if you remember their rematch in Miami, it involved Israel Adesanya not only producing one of the greatest come-from-behind knockouts we've seen on the title level, but his celebration in that moment was a little bit of taunting and a lot of just perfect timing there. You can.
Well, of course it was, because Israel Adesanya, once again, he knew that he finally got him. You know, after 4 fights, he finally got him in the 4th fight. You know, so it is what it is. And then on top of that, of course, he knew that he really should have not won that fight. The amount of taunting, he knew that he was losing in that fight. He knew that he was going to get stopped more than likely within that next round. You know, but because Alex Pereira pretty much gift wrapped him, you know, overall the opportunity to knock him out, he took it.
See how Pereira caught a little bit of that showmanship and delivered it because he heard the trash talk from Jamal Hill on the build to this fight, but he stayed true to himself, knows his strength.
Yeah, and Jamal Hill, and don't get me wrong, I like the great amount of confidence, but Jamal Hill was talking like, he was talking like he was John Jones or something. Like, dude, there's no offense, but, you know, and I think he was even talking a little bit about how Pereira got a title shot or all this sort of stuff. Like, no offense against you, Jamal Hill, but you pretty much were gift-wrapped the title at the light heavyweight class. I'm not stating that you were not deserving of it because, of course, you were able to, you know, win the vacant title, but it was a vacant title. And the reason why it was vacant is because Jiří Procházka, he, of course, ended up, I believe, having a shoulder tear or something like that. So he pretty much had to back out of that fight, or he could not do it, you know, after he beat Glover Teixeira to win the title, you know, in a very tough fight. So then he ended up beating what remained of Glover Teixeira, which was a very easy ass whooping from what I remember. And that's how he ended up winning the title. And then, of course, he ended up getting injured. So for all that talking, to get knocked out overall, you know, in the first round is what it is.
And oh, by the way, he also redeemed the loss of his mentor, brother, and almost really at times father figure in the great Glover Teixeira. We saw Pereira move his.
And Jiří Procházka, you know, he's a very decent fighter. He's a very dangerous fighter, but that dude, he has so many holes in his game. Like, that dude is terrible defensively. You know, he really probably should have lost that fight against Alexander Rakic when it comes down to it, but Alexander Rakic, once again, unfortunately, he let a little bit too many power punches get in on him, and he showed a little bit too much respect towards that of, what's his name, Jiří Procházka, once he started landing those punches. You know, he showed a little bit too much respect there. You know, so once again, you know, Jiří came out with the win, but Jiří is a dude that, you know, he's a guy that is a clear A grade fighter, but he's a little bit too wild. You know, he throws a little bit too many wild strikes. He doesn't throw a lot of, you know, super straight punches. He pretty much tries to go for the knockout at times. He keeps his hands down near his belly button. The man has very poor defense, and that's why he got hit so many times in that fight. You know, if he improved his striking and improved his defense, he'd be one of the top fighters in the UFC. But, you know, he really has a lot of holes in his game offensively. Defensively and offensively.
Camp to Connecticut in recent years, and that dynamic duo, him and his great coach in Teixeira, who lost, by the way, the vacant title opportunity against Jamal Hill just a couple years back. It really was a perfect night. He got the celebration. He got another big historic performance on such a historic night. What else can you say about Alex Pereira outside of legend, Hall of Famer already? The only thing now, as we tease, is what...
Well, the question is right now about Alex Pereira is he debatably the number one pound-for-pound fighter? And can he potentially win that third belt at the what is it, heavyweight class?
Else could he accomplish, maybe, just maybe, causing some danger up there at heavyweight?
One of 3 titles on the line at UFC 300. BMF title living up to its name. Max Holloway living up to his name. Masterclass, one of the greatest finishes in UFC history. BC, I don't really need to even ask a question. I'm just going to tell you to go because this was awesome.
Well, it was awesome because Max Holloway ended up coming back and he ended up putting on a great performance. But to be honest with you, I thought that the fights all around was terrible. Justin Gaethje, I was expecting a much better performance out of him. Now the question is, why did he not really perform up to par? Could it be overall that he's maybe getting a little bit older and a little bit long in the tooth? To be honest with you, that's what it really appeared to me. But it could maybe just be that Max Holloway, that he wasn't just running into his shots and that he was being a little bit more technical, and a little bit more, what's the word, tactful, I guess, than what Justin Gaethje predicted. It could just be that Justin Gaethje, that he's fighting a little bit too defensive as of late in terms of, I'm just going to back up and you're going to run into my shots. Because ever since Tony Ferguson, that strategy has pretty much worked, but it's not going to work against every single fighter. So once again, Max Holloway did a very good job, of outstriking that of Justin Gaethje. And of course, pretty much, embarrassing him. But Gaethje really had barely any offense here. I thought that he really put on a piss poor performance. It was probably the worst that I'd ever seen Justin Gaethje looked. And I've seen Justin Gaethje lose fights, but out of all the fights that I've seen him in, even the loss against that of Charles Oliveira, and even the loss against, that of, what was it? Even the loss against that of Dustin Poirier or Khabib Nurmagomedov. I mean, he at least, had some decent moments in the fight. He almost had no decent moments in this fight whatsoever. I mean, I think that he probably won round 4, but other than that, I mean, the man just looked absolutely awful. He had no offense whatsoever. He was barely throwing any leg kicks throughout this fight. Like what he usually does. He wasn't working in with the jab whatsoever. And once again, Justin Gaethje has not always been the most technical fighter, but it appears that his technical game has, improved a little bit over time. But I was a little bit surprised at how flat Justin Gaethje looked in this fight. Now, once again, it could just be that the things that Max Holloway brought to the table, it could just be that, maybe he couldn't handle him. But Justin Gaethje, to be honest with you, he he looked completely off in this fight.
It was awesome. Look, it was the BMF Championship. This should have been the main event of this historic card when you look at the star power and the expectations for violence. Even though we got violence, the prevailing headline was this virtuoso performance from Max Holloway, moving up in weight. Yes, he's only 32 years old, but he started fighting in the UFC when he was a teenager, long before he became the featherweight king. And we have counted him out a few times, including after his trilogy loss, which was his 3rd straight defeat.
Who has really been counting out Max Holloway, though? There's no offense against Max Holloway, but the UFC, for whatever reason, and it's probably because he has a big fan base and they're trying to appeal to that Hawaiian fan base / Samoan fan base. But Max Holloway, they've been on this dude's ass, and on his ball sack overall, really, for the past several years. Ever since he won the title against Jose Aldo, they've been doing nothing overall but pumping him up. As the greatest featherweight of all time, debatably the best boxer in the UFC, all this sort of stuff. Max Holloway is a great fighter, all-time great fighter, but he's been a little bit overrated in some of those categories. Great fighter, but there's a reason why against Dustin Poirier and against Alexander Volkanovski, he got completely dominated in both of those fights. It is what it is. So I really don't know what this guy's talking about. I think that people counted out Max Holloway a little bit more in this fight because of course, he did not do extraordinarily well at 155 before, and on top of that, he was getting a little bit older. But in terms of counting out Max Holloway completely, I don't really know who's completely counting out Max Holloway completely. All I hear basically is how great Max Holloway is overall, and how, he's so great,
to the great Alexander Volkanovski, who bloodied and battered him across 5 rounds. It didn't look like Max Holloway had a lot left. And when he signed on the dotted line against maybe the most dangerous, all-action, fan-friendly fighter in the sport's history in Justin Gaethje, which involved moving up in weight, back up to lightweight, the chorus of obituaries for Max's career from longtime MMA journalists, from hardcore fans, you know what that did? That lit a fire under Max Holloway. What we saw right here was what greatness is all.
Well, if it lit a fire under Max Holloway to perform better, apparently it made Justin Gaethje a burnout because, like I said, he didn't come up to fight in this fight. It just is what it is. I mean, he pretty much stared at Max Holloway the whole entire time, which I've never seen Justin Gaethje do. Now, once again, it could just be that his tactical approach was completely wrong. But to be honest with you, Justin Gaethje looked done in this fight to me. Like, he didn't look like the same fighter at all.
About the ability to dial back, take the criticism, use it as fuel. And the key for Max Holloway this time, unlike The last time we saw him move up to lightweight when he lost to Dustin Poirier in their rematch in 2019 for the vacant title, you saw Holloway rebuild his body so that he is a full-fledged lightweight on this night. And his ability to walk down there, lure Justin Gaethje into a vicious duel, and then knock him out with no time left on the clock after 5 all-action rounds, after pointing in the center of the cage.
I will say that is pretty crazy. But I've never seen Justin Gaethje really knocked out by a punch like that before. Even against Dustin Poirier and some of the other guys where I've seen him knocked out, he didn't get knocked out like that. So I'm not sure if Max Holloway's power really just improved that much, or like I said, maybe Gaethje is just a little bit too long in the tooth. And to be honest with you, once again, and this is not to strip away any credit from Max Holloway, this was still an A-grade win, no matter what version of Gaethje, because Gaethje, of course, is coming off of a victory over Dustin Poirier. But I think that Dustin Poirier really is the better all-around fighter than that of a Justin Gaethje. To be honest with you, I think that Dustin Poirier is probably a better all-around fighter than Max Holloway. But of course, Dustin Poirier didn't become a champion, throughout his career, at least the main one, So it is what it is. But, Justin Gaethje, once again, in my view, he he looked really odd in this fight. He didn't look anywhere near his peak form, in my view. But that could have been, once again, just what Max Holloway was bringing to the table.
Right? The famous call that we saw Max Holloway do back at UFC 199 against Ricardo Lamas in the closing seconds. He did it again. Only this time he delivered the walk-off KO against maybe, right? One of the hardest guys to finish in this sport's history. This is greatness. This is Michael Jordan.
Definitely one of the most dangerous fighters within the UFC's history, Mr. Justin Gaethje, and also a little bit hard to finish. But that's why, once again, I'm kind of looking at this a little bit with a raised eyebrow because, once again, Gaethje looked completely old in this fight. Like, he looked done. He looked like something was up with him. And I'm not trying to create any excuses or caveats whatsoever. Max Holloway deserves all the credit in the world for this fight. But Justin Gaethje, I don't know. He looked like complete whack juice in this fight.
Coming back from baseball in 1996 to reestablish his dominance. This is what the great ones do. And although there were plenty of highlights on this great night of fighting, this was Max Holloway's night altogether.
And there are certain fights where I've seen where a lot of people stated that, this fighter didn't look the same and all sort of stuff, like Crawford versus Spence. But, and you can maybe say that Spence looked a little bit different, maybe a bit rusty. But Spence showed me a lot of the same faults that he always has, within that fight. Like, I also remember Wilder versus Fury. A lot of people were trying to say that Wilder didn't look the same. No, he looked the exact same. It's just that, overall they either A, hadn't paid enough attention, or they wanted Wilder to win so bad they were just making excuses. But in this fight, there's a fight every now and then to where you can tell that fighter just didn't look quite the same. Josh Taylor against Teofimo Lopez, I didn't think that Josh Taylor looked the same. Tio against George Kambosos, well, I mean, that could have just been Tio being Tio, because, of course, later on it was revealed that Tio's not always the best offensive fighter. And this is one of those fights in my view. Justin Gaethje, in my view, he looked completely flat in this fight.
We talked about the $300,000 bonuses that UFC was flaunting to throw around. How about you double that? How about you put another zero on the end? Give him $6 million. Give him $60 million. Max Holloway showed once again why he's one of the greatest fighters of all time. And boy, is he not done yet, Hakeem. Calling out featherweight champion Ilia Topuria, saying he's willing to go to Spain to do it. This is what we ask of.
That'd be a great fight. That kid Ilia Topuria is none to fuck around with. That dude, in terms of skill, is one of the top pound-for-pound fighters in the world. Debatably one of the top 5 pound-for-pound fighters in the world. That dude is none to fuck around with. That kid Ilia Topuria, not only can he potentially put your lights out, but on top of that, he can completely piece you up. That would be an excellent fight. I would love to see that fight.
Of the ones that we declare to be great. Oh, wow. Max Holloway.
And if Max Holloway, of course, was able to beat that of Ilia Topuria, then, of course, some would actually have a great debate that maybe he could be the greatest featherweight champion of all time.
Great.
I would love to see that fight. But by the way, you're out here throwing $60 million around, so let me get a piece of that as well. I'm going to write that down. BC's throwing $60 million out. Okay. Wouldn't that be great, though, if we saw Max and Ilia in Spain fighting? With a title on the line, that would be a spectacle.
I would like to see a rematch between Volkanovski and Ilia Topuria next, but to be honest with you, Volkanovski looks like in that last fight, and it could just be that Topuria landed the correct punch, but I think ever since that knockout at 155, I think that Volkanovski has a little bit too much wear and tear on him. And I think that those 3 fights against Max Holloway, especially the second one, that it probably took its toll a little bit. I think Volkanovski, he still has a chance, but, he just looks like he has a little bit too much wear and tear, but we'll see.
In of itself.
It's one of the biggest fights you can make in the sport. And I don't want to judge Topuria, who just took out the longtime king, right, in the thorn and Holloway side, and Alexander Volkanovski, to announce his star-making performance there and what's his future out of Spain. It didn't look like cage side in Las Vegas on this night when they flashed to him that Topuria was all into this idea. But if UFC has their wants, and certainly they have the control to make it, Holloway's as big of a star as they have in the UFC, especially after that performance. Why not match him with one of the biggest risers we've seen in years and the always dangerous Topuria? Not only does that have the makings to be another shootout, what else can Max Holloway do to continue to add to his game in his early 30s and show us that he's not done yet, not by a mile?
Yeah, tied for the third most knockouts in UFC history with 11, reminding us, I'm still here, I'm him. Co-main event, Zhang Weili putting her strawweight belt on the line against Yan Xiaonan.
I believe overall that the guy compared it to Michael Jordan coming back overall, and no. Max Holloway. Now, of course, a lot of people will say, well, of course he's not comparing him to Michael Jordan. But I have to reiterate that once again because the Max Holloway fans believe that this dude is like literally the greatest fighter of all time. And no, he's not. What this would be comparable in my view overall is like Miguel Cotto and then a boxing overall when he came back and knocked out Sergio Martinez. One of the greatest fighters of all time for sure, but in my view, not really close to that GOAT conversation. But, it is what it is. And once again, that's even more similar because Sergio Martinez, in my view, was done in that Miguel Cotto fight. Gaethje looked, he looked absolutely flat in this fight. But once again, that could just be overall because of what Max Holloway is bringing to the table. Either way, in my view, it's an A-grade win, and Max Holloway deserves a great amount of credit. But I do wonder, overall, once again, at what point in time is Gaethje in his career? And he might just be done. I don't know. Or it could just be that Max, was a little bit too much for him. Probably a little bit of both. But Max definitely deserves a great amount of credit. He proved a lot of people wrong, including myself. I'm not shocked that he ended up winning the fight. But, of course, the fact that, he was, that dominant. To be honest with you, I don't think that Max Holloway, that he was the most dominant that I had ever seen him. But I think that Gaethje just allowed way too many opportunities. I just don't think that he was throwing enough. I don't think that he was offensive enough. I don't think that he was working on the inside enough. And unfortunately, that's what you get. But it is what it is. That's pretty much about it. But yeah, just to talk about some of the other ones, Jiří Procházka versus Alexander Rakic. That was another great fight. Jiří, in my view, he's going to have to get a little bit better defensively, especially against some of these other elite fighters. But of course, against that, of some of the other light heavyweights, they may not be able to compete with his level of power, and his level of striking. So we'll see. That'd be a great fight between Jamal Hill and Jiří Procházka. I'd love to see that one, but we'll see about that. Charles Oliveira versus Sarukian, of course. Sarukian, of course, is going to be a very big threat coming forward. At least, I believe that I'm pronouncing the gentleman's name correct. Please let me know if I'm wrong. That dude's going to be a very big threat because he knows how to wrestle. He knows how to strike. He knows how to finish. That dude, and I believe that he gave Islam Makhachev hell, about a few years ago. So that dude is going to be a humongous threat. If there's anyone potentially that's going to take Islam Makhachev off his mantle, it's going to be that dude right there. That's not going to be a fight that Islam, in my view, is going to be super excited to see. But we'll see about that. We'll see. That'll be very particularly interesting, And then, of course, we've seen some other ones like Sterling versus Calvin Kattar. A terrible fight. Not because Sterling overall, of course, put on the performance that he did, but because Calvin Kattar, he really had no answers whatsoever. I think that he maybe landed about 2 total strikes throughout that whole entire fight. But, it is what it is. But anyways, that's pretty much about it for today. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll talk to y'all later.